Welcome back, everybody, to me grumbling about the Wheel of Time, and it's time to continue with this. We're here to talk about a bunch of chapters in Lord of Chaos. I kind of forgot the numbers, but it's basically yeah. I forgot the numbers. Never mind. It's you'll see it in the title. It's mostly boring and then annoying is what it is. And it starts with a chapter called A Pile of Sand, and it ends with a chapter called To Interpret a Message, something like that. Read a message, you know what I mean. I'll put the numbers up. Anyway, let's get this started because I'm pissed off. Cheers. All right. So, here we are. You remember last time Egwene had wet dreams or something like it of Prince Gawain reciting poetry, which is apparently how romance works in these worlds. Whatever. Never mind, we're here to talk about what's going on. And there's not that much going down. Once again, we have basically our 3 points, sort of like Perrin still isn't back in like the fold basically, but we jump around with Rand and stuff going down. Mostly we look in quickly on Nynaeve and Elaine for a second, and we look in on Matt for a second, and that's about it. So basically, let's start with the Nynaeve Elaine bit, and obviously also a bit the Egwene bit, but you know. So Nynaeve and Elaine get to do more of what they always wanted to do, which is scrub pots, because apparently it's the other part that, Robert Jordan likes, is make women scrub pots. Whether that is because he had to do a lot of, galley duty during during his time in the military and I really hated it or not, I don't know. However, the interesting bit here is that what we see both with Egwene and then Nynaeve and Elaine, and it kind of comes back with Egwene later on, is the huge problem that is how women are portrayed here. Now, the criticism that Elaine and Nynaeve have for the Salidara Aes Sedai, which is that they don't do shit and just sit around because they're afraid and don't want to, do anything or don't want to plan. Now, that is, on the surface, a reasonable criticism. It's okay to put that out there, right? Because, yeah, they don't do anything. They just delay and delay and delay. And, yeah, that's... On the surface of it, that is fine. The problem, however, is that it leaves out the idea of, responsibility and whatnot. Because Elaine and Nynaeve have very emotional reasons why they want their group of Aes Sedai to support Rand. It's one of them, grew up with Rand, and the other one is deeply in love with poor old Rand, right? So, once again, we see that, cliched, dumb idea of, women are from Venus, men are from Mars, or whatever you want to call that 90s, 80s, 90s gender thing that Robert Jordan is so good at. And it's they have emotional, irrational reasons to then give up all their control to a man, which is sort of what this all boils down to, right? Is, women, in this case, the Aes Sedai, need to submit to Rand al'Thor. And our heroes, or heroines in this case, which are Nynaeve and Elaine, are obviously in the right when they want that to happen, but their reasons are that they have accepted that Rand is better at doing stuff, and those reasons are emotional, irrational. And that's just, that main narrative that just keeps on going. So, yeah, apart from that, it's just... I don't know. I don't need more dumb depictions of them scrubbing pots and hating it. I know they hate it. I understand why they hate it. I hate scrubbing pots. I get it. But still. And then you have just a bit more of dumb, meanness of people, of Aes Sedai to each other. And yeah, well, whatever. It's apparently we're back in high school drama kind of places. So there we are. They tell anyway. They kind of tell the people about that like wonderful terangrial. They saw that bowl that gives like weather control to Rand, and yeah, well, we'll see. The Aes Sedai decide to send a letter to the person in, I have forgotten the town, but you know, to actually get that bowl. And I assume the fight for the weather control bowl will be a huge element near the end of the novel. Apart from that, nothing much happens there. Let's look at Egwene. And Egwene, there's an interesting aspect with the way Egwene is written that I personally found, you know, once again explains sort of how Robert Jordan is working there. Like, it's once again that sort of ironic, almost mocking tone when we have stuff from her perspective. She behaves really emotionally, really dumb. She's jealous or whatever with her sense of propriety when she talks or thinks about Berlin, who is in charge of Carrion, right? She's like, oh no, she actually shows cleavage. Terrible person. She flirts openly flirts with men. What is she thinking? So, Elaine is very much appalled by that kind of behavior. She has a very, you know, conservative outlook, apparently still. And, you know, whatever. The problem that I see with this is where you have, you know, a similar, like, ironic view on customs and stuff in books like, with authors like Jane Austen. It kind of works because it is a criticism of the times. You read Jane Austen, stuff like that. It's highly critical of the Victorian age and, you know, that era in general, and societal rules and shit. Robert Jordan's not critical of any of those. It's like, yeah, all it does at worst is make Egwene look dumb. And I'm like, that's not really good. So that's sort of what I have like realized with Robert Jordan in general. It's like he tries for a lot of things. He tries to you know, use the inspiration from authors that he likes, and then he fucks it up because he's just incapable of actually figuring out what makes those authors good, or what makes, you know, to actually get the voice of those authors, which I guess is the point when I should probably go and read one of his Conan stories, because maybe he gets the oh so subtle nuances of Robert E. Howard's writing. Maybe, just maybe. I'm even doubtful there. All right. So, let's come to the first thing that is really fucking annoying this time around. All right. So, Rand. Oh, there's two things. I almost forgot. Let's talk about the I am your father, Luke, thing there. And that is, we find out who Rand's mom is. And Rand's mom is former almost queen, and, well, daughter heir of Andor. Whose name I have forgot. Tigraine? I think Tigraine, yeah. So that's the one who ran away because an Aes Sedai told her to, became a Maiden of the Spear, got knocked up by a Nael, and then died on Dragon Mound. Which, you know, whatever. And I'm fine. No, I'm not fine with it. I think it's a bit dumb, all in all. But, I'll talk about why I think it's dumb in a second. But first, let's look at the way it is like done here, which is exactly that ridiculous like point. It's like, yes, it was sort of like you have that one scene in, I think, Shadow Rising when the Maiden of the Spear or someone tells Rand about how who his mother was, or like about the story about Shail or what her name was. That Maiden of the Spear tells him that story, and he's like, yeah, that's probably my mother. And the point is, how they discovered it, it's like, there's the dragon reborn. And everyone's like, ooh, he looks like that princess that most of us have not seen in the last 20 years, 25 years, probably more like. And that's like the only thing they go on. It's like, he has the same kind of nose, basically. Facial features. Like, that's a little that's not very much. So the way it just like kind of drops out of nowhere, it's like, why are y'all looking at me this way? And then everyone's like, you know, you what? You look like that missing princess from like 30 years ago. And it's just a bit, it just comes out of sort of out of nowhere and a bit cheap. It's like, I know I'm probably harping on this too much, and the fault of that is like the fault of like the audiobook company that always puts that same dumb snippet of an interview with Robert Jordan where he talks about how he used the audiobooks to figure out whether he's gotten like all the foreshadowing worked out, and was like, no, Bobby J, you have not worked out the foreshadowing because it sucks at this point still. So let's look at the other side of that, what I mean, like the general bigger problem that I see with this book. And it's more like a general criticism and not something where I'm really angry with Robert Jordan. That is a genre thing. Now, what do I mean by that? Robert Jordan and like The Wheel of Time is sort of like this bridge of a fantasy novel between a more Tolkien-influenced, more mythology-influenced, like epic fantasy that we know, towards what you might call more modern, contemporary, sort of grittier, sort of more realistic fantasy of the Game of Thrones kind of school of writing stories. And we spoke about that early on when in The Great Hunt, when I talked about like how he drags up all these like small like characters that like have like 1 second of showing up and then are done again to just like show us that there are all these people in the world. And that's sort of where I'm going here. So the idea of the problem that we have with The Wheel of Time, or I have with The Wheel of Time, is that while it is pretending to have a huge cast and to have a huge living world with all these people doing stuff and whatnot, at the end of the day, we still have a very small cast of like main characters that are, for whatever reason, all connected again and again and again, right? It's like, why? And so you go back to that model of like mythology where you have that cast of heroes who are all related to each other, who are all connected because of fate and stuff, and the actual world of human beings that live there and do their stuff and do their life things, and like, you know, what you might see in like, you know, more modern stuff like Game of Thrones, or I mean A Song of Ice and Fire, or the First Love world, or Malazan, or whatever, where there is just this huge world. At that point, you don't have that like predestination chosen by fate, having to fulfill like small cast of heroes that jumps around in front of this backdrop. And this is, I guess, the problem that I mean. It's like you have basically two stories, or two worlds, two levels. You have the story of the heroes, which is the story of Rand, Mat, Perrin, Nynaeve, Elaine, Egwene, and maybe 5 or 6 more. Avienda, possibly. And then you have this backdrop which is just a backdrop of all the other people that are just like pushed around and like exchanged, like in a theater. You just like have another backdrop pulled down and that's it. And there's no connection. There's no actual connection between these like characters in the forefront of it, the main characters, which basically enact a typically Tolkien-esque style myth, and are once again all connected in all kinds of weird ways. And that's sort of where I find a bit of a disconnect there. It's like rules apply to those main characters, which are very much fairy tale mythology style rules that apply to them. It's like they are all chosen. They can rely on stuff like fate and shit, whereas the rest of the world just gets murdered in the background and no one cares about it. So that's just like, and I don't want to blame Robert Jordan too much for it. I guess it really shows that like bridge status, this like paradigm shift status, and he's trying to figure this shit out. He's just not very good at it. That's sort of my problem. He's aware of the fact that he needs to actually have a world with like actually living people, because he's trying to tell that kind of story, and not a mythology like Tolkien where you just have those main characters and you don't even hear about all the other people that are obviously also there because they're not important. But instead, he just still doesn't manage to connect those two. So there's awareness there. It's sort of like a bit like people when you look at painting and art history, and when people started to figure out or were aware of the fact that you need something like perspective, but they hadn't really figured out like how to do perspective, which they kind of figured out during the Renaissance and then moving forward to Baroque. When you look at that, you sometimes have these like pictures that where he's like, yeah, they know that perspective is an important thing, but they're trying to figure it out. Robert Jordan hasn't figured out perspective, I guess. That's sort of what I mean with that. But that's interesting for me as someone who's interested in the history of fantasy literature. It's not something that makes me really angry at Bobby J. What does make me angry at Bobby J, however, is the next big thing we haven't talked about yet, So over time, I got annoyed at Bobby J setting up gender roles and gender stereotypes a lot. I got annoyed at him for really, really messing up the idea of consent. I got annoyed at him for racial stereotypes, cultural stereotypes, and how he reinforces those in all kinds of problems. Racism, how he basically used a lot of racism and Orientalism. But you know what we haven't spoken about yet? Cultural appropriation, and how Robert Jordan fucks up that one. So what do I mean? Rand wanders into Kyrian to talk to people, and we'll figure out what's wrong with that kind of stuff there in a second. And while he's wandering around, he learns about and is witness to the fact that the people of Kyrian are trying on or are trying to incorporate Aiel customs into their daily life. So they're learning to fight with swords, and they're getting it wrong. Is sort of the main problem is they're getting it wrong. Like they're fighting with swords, which doesn't make any sense because Aiel hates swords. They're kind of making the whole idea of Jito, that like weird custom of like in like honor and debt or whatever you want to call it. They're getting this wrong, and the Aiel are complaining about it a lot. I was like, you know what? That's wrong. And Rand's answer at the end of the day is, well, whatever, you got to deal with this. Times are changing. You got to change. You got to accept other people taking over your stuff. That's just like how it is. And first of all, good on Bobby J for realizing that if you have a group with a very distinct form of customs, that they might get annoyed if other people take over their customs without understanding it. He really gets that part fairly right for Robert Jordan. That's fine. And then to just go like, what? Fuck it. If people are annoyed because more privileged people take over their very specific culture in all kinds of ways and getting it wrong, then it's on those less privileged people whose culture gets co-opted to just like sit tight and accept it because whatever. And that's, well, it's fucked up is what it is. It's like, why the fuck do that? It's like, because at the end of the day, he's not doing anything with it. At least not so far. He's not doing anything with it. He's just like putting it in there to then send us that message of like, whatever, cultural appropriation is okay, and the group whose culture gets appropriated has to deal with that and has just to accept it. Yeah, fuck that. Fuck that. Then, what else is interesting? Robert Jordan being like inconsistent, I guess. We have that whole scene when Rand walks into the school of inventors. And there's a lot wrong with that whole idea. It's like the idea of like Rand putting together that like school of inventors, which reminds me a bit of like the Royal Society around like 1700 or whatever, with everyone trying out all kinds of crazy stuff to, maybe invent shit. That's fine. And then you have that whole scene, right? So Rand is like, that sounds good. We should probably do these and these things. It's like, all right, I should go to Berlin because she's in charge in Cairhien right now. And I should tell her to give those people money to further develop those ideas. Because, line of, communication is an authority, is important here. You're undermining her authority if you're doing that. And like one fucking sentence later, he's like, wow, I like this telescope. You gonna do this. Build this thing. Here's 100 gold pieces extra. Why? Why the fuck? And it's like, either ignore, and at the end of the day, we could completely cut out that entire scene. It is doing nothing for the story. It is doing nothing for the world. It is nothing at all except Robert Jordan showing once again how his world doesn't make any sense. But, you know, there we are. And just like giving us a bunch of like, oh, look, here's a plow, and here's a combine harvester invention and stuff. And I'm like, well, fine, you want to play that thing, but why put in these bits and pieces? Which then, once again, also is important because apparently this world is very much built on authority. And it's important to have very rigid authority, which is, you know, Rand's in charge. The more complex the system underneath him gets, the more problematic it is, because you don't want to have like the deep state. You don't want to have like a large state. You want the small state, like the libertarian style of like one person in charge and everyone has to do what they do. And apart from that, just own a shit ton of guns, I guess. So yeah, there's that bit. What did I mean, like the world building doesn't make any sense? The idea is, once again, this is 3,000 years since the breaking of the world. And after 3,000 years, people are finally coming back to inventing like an actual plow that has like more than one furrow at one time. Like, when you look at history, like in the last 3,000 years, that's like 1000 BCE. That's when we discovered writing. We managed to go all the way from that place to today with computers and shit. And we started out with nothing as a species. In this world, people started out with a lot of remainders of the Age of Legend, which is this high-tech age. It's not like they came up like straight out of the Bronze Age there. And it just doesn't make any sense. There's no actual explanation for that. And that kind of dovetails with like the next thing that we need to talk about. That is the encounter of, what's his name, Rand, with more of the Ogier. And I'll talk about the ogre a bit in a moment. But my point is, what we learned there when they look at the maps with all those waygates and shit is like that humanity has been in retreat. Countries have been shrinking ever since Arthur Hawke went, and things have gone, badly for humanity. And why? Like, why? There is no fucking explanation in this world of why everything is in decline, why the countries are shrinking down and whatnot. That's not how that works. That's not how these things work. You need to explain it with, like, either geological or meteorological or other ways of why there is a decline. Now, is that maybe influenced by Tolkien when you read The Lord of the Rings, which is also sort of post-apocalyptic, and you have all those countries they walk through where everything is like ruined and shit, and humanity is just holding out? Maybe that's the case, but Tolkien never thought about like actually creating a realistic world. He wanted to tell a story about one of those like golden age things that are sort of like fallen last stand of humanity kind of crap things. But he had different aims. And even there's the idea that, those places got ruined by orcs and never rebuilt and shit. Robert Jordan leaves out that stuff. Is it possible that all those kingdoms got ruined by Trollocs and Myrddraal, and then humanity just never rebuilt? Possible. Does it make any sense? No, of course not, because you don't mention it, Bobby J. You don't fucking mention it. You're just like, humanity is giving up kingdom after kingdom. Apparently we have a decline in population numbers, for whatever reason. Is it because everyone is basically able to channel and the Aes Sedai, the Red Ajah, just kills all those people? Maybe. We're not saying. Apparently, people are dying out. But the climate can't be actually to blame. because the climate and like has only been bad for the last 2 years, like 1.5 year, where we switched from like it being way too cold in the first book to it being way too hot in the sixth book. But there's no reason given. There's no fucking reason given. And once again, if you're trying for a more realist, more like gritty whatever tone, which clearly is what Robert Jordan is trying to do, a more pseudo-historical kind of thing, then you need to give reasons for why the last couple, like why humanity hasn't gotten beyond like barely medieval times, despite everyone being literate and having printed books in the last 3,000 years. You need to give reasons for that stuff. Otherwise, it's just like, I don't know, dumb. So yeah, there is that bit. Now let's look quickly at the Ogier and then look at plotting that doesn't make any sense. All right, the Ogier show up, and it's Haman, and I've forgotten the other two, looking for Loyal because, you know, the mother wants, like, his mother wants to marry him off because that's apparently important, and it's an entire fucking caricature. It's once again Robert Jordan not getting it. It's once again Robert Jordan not fucking getting it. Right? The Ogier are basically Ents. I mean, they're like heavily inspired by Ents, but where you know, Treebeard, like Fangorn and gang and Quickbeam and whatnot in Lord of the Rings, in mostly the Two Towers, have this like weird like gravitas and that whole idea of like they're long lived because they're trees. They're fucking trees. They're walking, talking trees. So of course they're like in centuries and whatnot. Ogier are just like tall and long lived apparently. So they also have to insist on everything being too hasty all the time, and it just becomes ridiculous, and just the way it is treated just takes away all the dignity that people like Treebeard at the end of the day still have, right? It's important when you read Lord of the Rings that those Ents are very dignified beings that are mourning the death of nature, and you can connect that to all kinds of like parts of Tolkien's traditionalism and stuff, and I'm fine with that. But the point is, he actually tries to do something with it. Whereas the Ogier are just there to make dumb, don't be hasty jokes, and then Robert Jordan to go and like use the same 3 fucking adjectives to describe how they talk every single fucking time one of those Ogier opens his mouth or opens their mouth. We get the us rumbling adjectives. Like, why the fuck do that? Like, maybe marry a different editor for fuck's sake. Apparently the one you got for this book didn't tell you that this is bad prose. So yeah, apart from that, we just like have them do the whole like Waygate thing, which, you know, I'm fine with the Waygate bit. Of like Rand saying like, you know, I know the dark side is using those Waygates, so tell me where they are, so I can like, you know, block them up basically, or guard them at least. That makes sense. That's like a tactical idea that I can live with. What doesn't make sense is the inconsistency that says that Rand has visited a steading twice, because as far as I know, there's one visit to a steading which is at the near the end of the Great Hunt when they go to steading Tofu. I was going to, in my mind, it's always steading Tofu, so all the Ogier there are probably soy boys, I guess. Who knows? Which kind of makes sense because they're all pacifists and all of that stuff. But anyway, so steading Tofu, he visits that one at the end of the Great Hunt when they want to teleport to Toman Head and then don't do it because, you know, they can't do it because they're, you know, in steading Tofu, everyone's an indecisive soy boy who doesn't have the balls to just open that Waygate. So instead, they, you know, use the teleport stone thing. Anyway, that's the only time Rand ever goes into a fucking steading. So when was the other one? Did I miss something? If yes, please tell me, because I can't remember a second time Rand goes into a steading. So yeah, minor annoyance there. Just, you know, bad, you know, inconsistency for me. However, then we come to a like completely unnecessary bit of plotting, right? So the idea is that those three Ogier need to go to the two rivers to pack up Loyal. So Loyal goes back to the steading, gets married, and whatnot. We don't ask why in a different species, that being the Ogier, society is just as misogynist, by which I mean ruled by all these like evil, powerful women kind of thing, as it is in human society. We don't ask that. That's just like how things are. However, what happens is they need to go to the two rivers, and Rand's like, you know what? Now you've told me about all these. Now you've just told me about all these way gates. Why not teleport to the most dangerous one, which is Shadar Logoth? And the Ogier agree. And the entire part of that story, like them teleporting there, them losing one of the Aiel, like, maidens there for whatever reason, which doesn't get explained, Rand being all pissed off about stuff, it's all completely unnecessary at this point. Will Bobby J probably pull it out of his arse later on? Probably, yeah. I believe he will. But at this point, there is no explanation for why Rand would choose that specific waygate to go there to put his trap around. None whatsoever. Because yes, the idea is he can just teleport anywhere with his gates that he opens. And go to one, put like a trap around it so, dog spawn, is that like the word, Trollocs and Myrdral can't get out of that gate without dying. Fine. But since those are just like teleporting gates you can just put to anywhere on the fucking earth, why does he go to the Shadar Logoth gate with him? Makes no sense. There's no reason for that except to build up the Rand being a dickhead to Zulin, which has like, sort of dumb repercussions later on. That's like the other bit there, right? With like Rand is just being a dickhead for dickhead's sake to the Aiel, especially to Zulin there, and I guess it will maybe, hopefully, turn into something more. But right now, that entire those chapters are completely unnecessary. It's like, if Rand wanted to, he could just open a gate to the two rivers right from the start, send those three Ogier through, or ask them to jump with him to 5 different places and close 5 way gates. That would have been possible, but instead we go back to Shadar Logoth to lose one more Maiden of the Spear, so Rand can feel shitty about losing Maidens of the Spear because he can't see those his bodyguard die. And so that's what I mean with really bad storytelling. It's why do that? Give some sort of reason why he especially wants to lock up the Shadar Logoth gate. There are reasons for it, maybe, that you could choose. It's at the arse end of nowhere, or yes, Rand can, visualize it because he has been to Shadar Logoth, or he wants to lock up that one because it's in the middle of nowhere, whereas you can just easily post a guard outside of Cairhien to that one gate that is there, or there are all kinds of possible explanations, but why do I, the reader, have to build up these convoluted explanations for Rand's behavior? That's your fucking job, Bobby J. That's not my job, because I'm not the one writing these books. I got better things to do with my life. So yeah, there's that bit. And, well, let's look at the other stuff that is still sort of, I guess, important to do. Matt's writing down somewhere, gets attacked by Shido that are sent through a portal, which I guess means Shido sent by a Forsaken. He survives. We meet Oliver again, that boy that he rescues, kind of saves in a previous chapter, who kind of becomes something of a mascot, apparently, now, of the Red Hand, so yeah, it's not necessarily an important chapter, apart from that apparently someone is killing people randomly. But well, it is what it is. Same with another of these like quick chapters, which is the chapter with Samael and Grayendal when they like meet at Samael's place, and we get to show off a bit of like technology. Like apparently he has like an iPod or something like that to play music and whatnot, and he's like, yeah, you know what, I've made a truce with what's his name, Rand, and all we get out of that is like the information that one of the Forsaken, Messana, is that her name, is ensconced in the White Tower, which we kind of knew already, I guess, possibly. Because we knew that Forsaken are in the White Tower, but you know, whatever. That's like the information we get out of there, plus once again, like another Forsaken that has possibly been at Shale Ghul, being told that they will be the Nameless, which, you know, whatever a Nameless is. Apparently I'm the second in command to the Dark Lord, but you know, it still feels kind of weird to have that scene, apart from just, you know, showing off that, yes, the Forsaken were super powerful in like a high-tech age and not only just now. But, you know, whatever. As I said before, the Forsaken just seem to be idiots when they're scheming against each other, but there we are. Alright, that's sort of all for today, I think. Overall, things are drawn out far too long in these chapters right now. We get unimportant, dumb, like, depictions of stuff that we've seen before. It gets repetitious to no fucking end. We still have something of an odd focus on necklines of clothes for whatever reason. We reinforce the stereotypes of women being all emotional, making their choices through their emotions, being men being incapable of understanding women, and yes, cultural appropriation is fine, and it's the underprivileged group that has to just live with it, because whatever. Also, Rand gets to be inconsistent, and Ogier are just a laughing stock because Robert Jordan has not understood how Ents work. Plus, plotlines that don't make any sense and are just put in there to maybe set something up and still lack any motivation. But you know, character motivation is not something that I have come to expect from anyone in these books. There we are. I hope you have a great day. I certainly don't. Anyway, see you around. Cheers.